People involved in such field as psychiatry who have to rate degrees of mental dysfunction should probably do it on a 0 to 5 scale instead of using a strictly verbal description. 1 would be the minimum level of diagnosable dysfunction. 2 would mean that a person is more or less obviously impaired in some form or another. 3 would mean that a person has significant impairment and function. 4 would mean that a person is basically not fully capable of taking care of themselves. And 5 would mean that a person is completely disrupted. If you draw it on a graph where the scale from 0 to 5 in the vertical direction would represent schizophrenic dysfunction, then a scale from 0 to 5 positive would be perhaps mania, and 0 to negative 5 would be depression. The person can then be indicated if they are stable with perhaps a cross mark at their position and a circle. That would indicate that a person is stable at that rating. If a person is more variable, an area can be drawn, and within that area is the area that the person is diagnosable over the course of time. If the person has a couple of stable points, the 2 stable points could be indicated, and then a bridging line between them. Indications can be given of how long the person switches and how long they are stable. H being hour, D being day, W being week, M being month. If a person typically suffered from mild depression, but then every 3 months spent 2 weeks severely depressed, that can be indicated. A third dimension might also be desirable above the plane. Since it really can't be graphed smoothly, it will be indicated strictly by numbers. A third dimension could represent socialization, again on a 0 to 5 scale. Socialization can be broken into 2 parts. The first is the person's actual socialization, and the second is the person's presentation in public, essentially their glibness. So if a person has a rating of 5.2, the person is severely poorly socialized, close to being a sociopath really, and the 2 would indicate that the person is identifiably poorly behaved in public. A marking of 1 and less then could indicate a person below a diagnosable level. So if a person is 5/less than 1, that would mean a person who appears to be normal in public, but who is really no concern whatsoever for other human beings. Additional markings could be used for poor socialization, indicating, for instance, with superiors with an S, co-workers with a C, dating relationships with a D, authority with an A. The idea being that you could have a person who is marked as, let's say, 1 and 1 or 1 and less than 1 for general socialization, but in terms of dating relationships, they might be a 3 and a 2. So the person in their day-to-day relationships gets along fine with people, but in dating relationships, they're abusive, obnoxious, and treat other people badly. This gives a compact and clear form of expressing the general outlines of a person's dysfunctions. It makes it easier both for the psychiatrist who marks the graphs and for other psychiatrists who might look at it to quickly evaluate the nature of the person. If you're seeing, for instance, within an area that a person expresses their dysfunction, you can put a marker if a person is rapidly varying, indicate the endpoints of the marker, and again, indicate a time scale. So if you have a marker of a given length and you say 1 hour, this means you have a very unstable person who's constantly changing over the course of a day. And this can be easily evaluated then by anyone who has to interact with this person. Additional spaces would be given below the sheet of paper, which would be for the verbal assessment of the person, and a complete write-up of the person's particular functions and dysfunctions. I would argue that the most important factor in dysfunction is actually disruption in a feedback loop. That is the ability to take information, identify it, collate it, and then be able to use it for useful purposes and to make decisions. That could perhaps be indicated graphically with a symbol indicating a circular motion with a line and an arrow to indicate the sense of feedback. Then inside of that could be written a number again from 0 to 5 indicating disruption in the feedback loop. Putting all of these factors together, socialization, depression, schizophrenia, and feedback, gives a pretty good idea of what a person's functions and dysfunctions are.